Welcome to the Hecht Effect with certified financial planner professional Nancy Hecht.
Nancy, thanks again for having another video cast out there that's helping people. This is fantastic that you're doing this during a time when you could easily just be sitting at home like all of us and just taking phone calls. You're actually making these great podcasts and video casts that are helping individuals just like me. On our last video cast, we talked about early investors, individuals who have the opportunity or have the luxury of time. What if you don't have the luxury of time and you're looking at retirement soon? What is your best bet when it comes to a crisis like this? How should people who are nearing retirement be looking at a time like right now?
Well, if somebody is not retiring this year, then they have a little bit of time benefit on their side. Because I do firmly believe, as well as a lot of my colleagues, that come the end of the year financially, our country's going to be in a different shape. When there's a lot of money that's sitting on the sides, there's a lot of people that are raring to get back to spending money at all the various different, department stores and restaurants and services that we had prior to this disease spent money with. And things will come back. They're not going to come rushing back. Everybody's thinking it's going to be a U-shaped recovery that should start somewhere around end of the summer, beginning of the fall, but that will happen. So throughout this year where we've seen our market values decline on our portfolios, if you haven't sold anything, then you should be in decent shape. And it may take through the end of next year for things to completely recover and then profit nicely to make up for the declines in the beginning and the middle of this year.
Correct, because if you're still investing right now, you're getting a lot for your money.
Right. It's a great time to be buying.
So can you readdress that? I want you to emphasize that. I know we talked about this a couple of times, and we talk about market decline versus losing money.
Right.
I'd like you to really drive that point home.
Sure. All right. So we're all getting ready to get our quarterly statements and see how much our dollar value has dropped on our investments. Most people are going to see significant decreases in the value of their portfolio. But if they have quality investments and they have not sold anything, they have not lost anything.
Right.
The tide has receded a little bit, but the seawater is exactly the same. And when the tide comes rushing back in, the values will go back up.
So the reality of this situation for someone who's nearing retirement, and let's talk about the worst case scenario. If they don't have a year, let's say they were ready to retire now. Let's say that in 2 months I was looking forward to retirement. What is the best bet for an individual like that?
Okay, or some friends of mine that hadn't planned on retiring but have now become laid off are in the same situation as those people that are ready to retire.
Great point.
Nobody says just because you're retiring right now, you have to liquidate your 401k or 403b or whatever the case may be.
Great point.
You can let that account sit. You won't be adding anything to it, but you can allow the market values to increase again. And then when they increase, you can roll it over to a self-directed IRA account where you have a lot more choice and generally less expense than through a corporate type of plan. But the important thing to know is if there are quality investments in those plans, you do not have to liquidate anything right now. You can let that account sit with the current custodian.
That's a great
point. And
point.
one thing that the CARE Act has done is if somebody does need to liquidate from their 401k because they've lost their job or they've been furloughed, the extra 10% withholding penalty by withdrawing directly from a corporate plan has been waived.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So that's great advice. And that's, that's better to hear. I wouldn't say it's the greatest situation, but that's better to hear than, oh, well, the only option is going back to work.
Yeah. No, I mean, you can let your investments sit and heal.
So let's say, and I think you addressed it a little bit, but let's say that I've got, a few years before retirement. is there an emergency plan or a crisis plan, or is there something I could do as an early, let's say a mid-level investor who's nearing, not nearing retirement, but has a couple of years? What's the best way to look at my investments at that point? And I know one of the best things, the best advice I've ever gotten from you is put 6 months of cash away. So the 6 months of cash is always a smart point to always bring up inside of these podcasts, these video casts. But beyond that, let's talk about my investments. Let's say I'm 5 years away from retiring.
Okay, so you need to know what your tolerance for risk is. And for a lot of people, it may have changed over this crisis we're going through. But you have to keep in mind that even though you're going to retire in 5 years, you're probably going to live for another 20, 25 years beyond that. So you always need to have some equities in your portfolio because that's what keeps you ahead of inflation. So nobody wants to go completely to bonds or to cash. You may want to look at a little bit more of a balance, maybe 45, 50% equities, and then the rest in income producing items. But nobody can afford to go 100% to income.
And you're saying basically for a novice like me, that would be less aggressive versus aggressive, correct? I should probably not be as aggressive, but I should be still looking at not necessarily going to that completely less aggressive approach, right?
Most of my clients that are 5 years or less from retirement are considered moderate investors.
There you go.
Which is somewhere around 50, 55% equity and the rest in income. Going down a step, if you're moderately conservative, you're only looking at maybe 35, 40% in equities and the rest in income. But the point is there's always some equities with the income.
That makes sense. Okay. And as always, I like adding this to all of our video casts because not a lot of people think about this stuff. Beneficiaries. Let's talk about the importance of beneficiaries.
Okay. You want to know who you want to eventually get your dollars. And you don't want the state deciding that for you. So any retirement account you have, you should have primary and contingent beneficiaries. Any non-retirement account, whether it's a non-retirement investment account or a bank account, you can add primary and contingent beneficiaries onto that. Whether it's a spouse, whether it's children, grandchildren, a charity, it really doesn't matter. You should be the person to decide who gets your assets once you've passed on and there's still funds left to benefit somebody.
And let's look at the scenario when I don't have a beneficiary and something happens. What happens to my money?
Well, then the state of Florida will decide who gets the money for you. They will determine who is your next of kin. And that could be somebody that you like or don't like, or somebody that you know or don't know. They will keep searching until they find somebody who is your next of kin, and that's who will get those assets.
I'd much rather control it on my own. Nancy, as always.
Well, yeah, you would think so.
Right. As always, thank you so much. These are very informative, and at a time like this when people are worried about their finances, it's great to hear you give us some great advice and some hope.
If you have questions, contact Nancy Hecht at nancy@financialgroup.com. Thanks for listening to the Hecht Effect with certified financial planner professional Nancy Hecht.